The trade between the Phoenix Suns and the Utah Jazz changes everything we thought we knew about the NBA, and specifically the Phoenix Suns going into the 2025 NBA trade deadline. If you guys are new to Utility Sports, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content you see here today. And I am taken aback after a big time and very unique trade between the Utah Jazz and the Phoenix Suns. A trade market for Jimmy Butler has suddenly revived, and there is a team out in the league that is desperate enough to pull the trigger on a 35-year-old aging star who honestly continues to burn bridges every single organization he's stopped in. But Phoenix, desperate enough to try and win around Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, now find themselves in a situation where they might just do the impossible and find a way to trade for another former All-Star in Jimmy Butler, a team that came into this year with very few draft assets. They might be on the verge of spending all of them, and there's a bunch of different ways that they could go about doing that to get Jimmy Butler, and that's what today's video is really centered on. First, we're going to talk about the actual trade itself. So here was the report from Shams Charania. The Phoenix Suns traded their 2031 unprotected first-round pick to the Utah Jazz for 3 first-round picks, essentially tripling their first-round draft capital that they have to trade. The Suns are acquiring the least favorable first in 2025 between Cleveland and Minnesota. Very likely that will be the Cavs pick. 2027 between Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah. And then also 2029 between, again, Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah. And you might be wondering, okay, why is this not a no-brainer home run for the Phoenix Suns? Now listen, I think it's a very creative move for the Phoenix Suns, but there are a few key words we need to highlight in this tweet from Shams Charania that really, I think, points to the perils long-term for the Phoenix Suns and the significant upside for the Utah Jazz in making this trade. The first keyword we need to highlight is unprotected. The Suns' 2031 unprotected first-round pick potentially could be the very top pick in the draft. You think about where the Suns are currently as an organization. Even with Devin Booker in the heart of his prime at 28 years old, Kevin Durant still playing all NBA level basketball at 36, this Phoenix Suns team is not good at all. And with the ramifications of the second apron and how teams that spend big time are going to be penalized long term, it's difficult to know what the future of the Phoenix Suns will really look like and if they'll ever be a team that is scary at some point in the future after this current iteration of team expires, especially if the Suns trade for a big time name like a Jimmy Butler. Where does that leave them? And what are some of the situations in which they're able to recover as an organization? And obviously the upside here for Utah is that 2031 pick might be one of the most valuable assets down the road. And then also the other keywords we have to highlight in here, least favorable. The Suns, while they did get 3 first-round picks to use, whether they end up keeping them, which I think is very unlikely, or end up trading them away in pursuit of a star player, which we'll talk about more soon here, that least favorable designation makes it very likely that these picks will not be attractive assets. So Utah, a team that, listen, they have a vast collection of picks. They have the picks from the Rudy Gobert trade, the Donovan Mitchell trade. They have other draft picks as well that they've been able to coop up over the last couple of years from trades. And with that in mind, they have the Lakers first in 2027, for example. The Jazz, with a whole bunch of young players already on the roster, aren't looking to just continue adding fringe first-round talents at the end of the first round via draft. They want premium draft assets, and they have a chance to upgrade these 3 first-round picks into a real premium one potentially down the road in that 2031 first from Phoenix. And the least favorable designation as well makes it so that these picks, even though Phoenix, again, they tripled their draft assets in the first round, they really didn't do it because, and I've been saying this on the channel for a long time, quality outweighs quantity when it comes to the NBA draft. Having a pick in the top 5 or top 10 potentially is way more valuable than a pick in the 20s. And that least favorable designation, thinking about Minnesota with Anthony Edwards over the next 5 to 7 years. You think about Utah with all their young up and coming talent, hopefully. Think about Cleveland, who's been the best team in the league so far this season. the likelihood that all three of those teams are bad simultaneously is not very high, which means these picks on average are going to be anywhere from maybe pick 21 to pick number 30. And now, if I asked you right now, if you had pick number 1 and I offered you pick 22, pick 27, and pick 30 for it, you would say no. Because again, even though I'm offering you 3 first-round picks for 1, your first-round pick is more valuable than the 3 first-round picks I'd be offering you. And that's ultimately what we see in this trade that went down here. However, again, the Suns aren't doing this to draft. They're doing it to try and form a new big 3. And they had 1 first-round pick, yes, but it was a long ways out in 2031. And not every single GM around the league has the luxury of being patient like Danny Ainge does. A lot of these GMs are on ticking time bombs where they don't have the most job security in the world. So that 2031 first might not be as valuable to them as a 2025 or 2027 first round pick, which is ultimately what Phoenix is now equipped with to trade. And that's what they're going to look to go out into the marketplace with in an attempt to land Jimmy Butler. Kevin Durant wants Jimmy Butler in the Phoenix Suns organization. Jimmy Butler wants out of Miami and specifically wants in Phoenix. He wants to be around star talent, something we really haven't seen with Jimmy Butler for a long time. He had a short stint in Philadelphia, spent some time with Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins in Minnesota. But again, that's not the star talent we're talking about here with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. Just a new level to this, and the perimeter talent around him, the two-way play that Jimmy Butler can hopefully still provide and bring in the playoffs for Phoenix could be transformational for the way that this team has looked. They have not been a great team this year. The Suns have not been, which is why a renovation, a facelift, if you will, could completely change the way this Suns team looks. But there are some precursors we have to talk about before we can even get into any of those trade frameworks. First of all, what you're going to see is the Milwaukee Bucks' involvement in these trades. However, because of the second apron rules, there are a lot of designations and restrictions that the Bucks must follow. So to get to a point where they can aggregate salaries, and by that I mean combine 2 player salaries or 3 player salaries together in a trade to actually get a deal done for a player more expensive than someone like Chris Middleton, they have to get below the second apron and then ultimately stay below the second apron, as aggregating salaries would hard cap them at the second apron number as well. So keep that in mind. The way to get there is essentially salary dumping Pat Connaughton. The Bucks have to clear a little bit over $6.5 million. Pat Connaughton makes a little bit over $9 million. It's a very movable contract, and an example that I have here in this video is maybe the Bucks 2031 first round pick with some type of severe protections on it. This one has a lottery protection, for example, that would maybe turn into a 2031 second round pick. The Pistons send back some whatever second rounder, the Knicks one in 2028. I felt like kind of did this justice. It's not a valuable draft asset. It's not a valuable second round pick at all. It's just kind of fluff. You could also argue that maybe it's just 1 second round pick, but I know Pistons fans will push it back on that, saying we don't want to use our cap space to eat Pat Connaughton's contract. I understand that, but at the end of the day, maybe there's a world where something like this does come to fruition. The Bucks would probably be asking Detroit for this. And, you know, Detroit's not the only team in the world that could harbor a contract, but they are the only team with cap space, which makes it much easier to do. There's no 3-team involvement. It's a lot more straightforward. Now, there is still a world where Milwaukee could trade Pat Connaughton somewhere else, take back other salary, and then maybe make it a 3-team deal where Milwaukee can get off of that player. But again, that's more complicated. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Pat Connaughton has to get traded for Milwaukee to get below the second apron. It could be Bobby Portis, but I think Pat Connaughton, who has a lesser role, lesser significance there in Milwaukee, makes more sense for this kind of framework right now. And then also, a stipulation that you're going to see in this. You're going to see these picks from the Jazz. Ultimately, that bottom part of the graphic there, the Jazz-Suns trade, is the trade we saw in real life, where the 2031 first from Phoenix goes to Utah, and in return, the Suns get all 3 of those first-round picks, the least favorable of Cleveland, Minnesota, the least favorable of Cleveland, Minnesota, Utah. Those picks will be rerouted now into deals. So let's get into our first of 2 frameworks. It's a 4-team trade, and this is where things get complicated, so follow along with me. What I want you to do as we're going through this is comment your thoughts. Tell me if you think these are fair trades. Comment if you think these are semi-plausible. I've worked through every single team in the league, all 30 teams. You know how I put together my trade guides, all of the work I put in. It leads to moments like this so I can talk through some of these possibilities. And it gets tricky here And Milwaukee specifically has some salary issues that we'd have to figure out along the way here too, so keep that in mind. But Jimmy Butler goes to Phoenix in this deal. Again, the Suns are the driving force. They're the ones trying to find creative offers to give to Pat Riley, to give to the Miami Heat, to ultimately get a deal done for the aging star in Jimmy Butler. The Heat, this is the team that is looking for flexibility. They're trying to get off of Jimmy Butler in a way of still getting draft assets and a little bit of talent while also getting long-term flexibility. I think this deal with the Raptors involved as the fourth team is one of the easiest ways to do that. You get Chris Middleton, who is on a significantly cheaper contract than Jimmy Butler. Again, the precursor to this is the trade of Pat Connaughton, so Milwaukee can aggregate salaries. Chris Boucher and Davion Mitchell both come over from Toronto. In this deal, now the Heat get 2 first-round picks and 1 second-round pick. They get a second-round pick via Portland from the Raptors. They also get a 2025 first-round pick, the least favorable of the Wolves or Cavaliers, which will be essentially pick 30, maybe pick 29 in the 2025 NBA draft. They also get a first-round pick in 2027. Again, the least favorable of Minnesota, Utah, and Cleveland. The Raptors, for doing business and being this helpful team, this fourth team to facilitate a trade, they walk out with Bobby Portis's contract. They get Marjon Beauchamp, who the Bucks do not have any long-term plans of keeping, and they get that 2029 least favorable first-round pick. Again, with that least favorable designation, I know some people are going to be saying, why would the Raptors get a first in this? Well, they're giving up a solid young player in Davion Mitchell. Not a great one, not a super high minutes per game guy, but someone who I do think in Miami could actually end up sticking there long term. I think he's the type of player, you look at how Gabe Vincent performed for Miami. I think Davion Mitchell could be a real standout under Eric Spoelstra. And also for being the team willing to take in Bobby Portis's contract, willing to help get things done here in the deal, you get incentivized in that way. Chris Boucher is probably worth a second-round pick or two. Davion Mitchell's worth a second-round pick or two. You factor that value in, and you also factor in eating the contract of Bobby Portis, which has 2 years instead of just 1 year as an expiring. That's the kind of thing that, you upgrade, 3 second-round picks into a terrible first-round pick with that 2029 first with the least favorable designation. And the Bucks here, this is where things get tricky. They take in Bradley Beal and Alec Burks. Now remember, Bradley Beal has a no-trade clause. Bradley Beal has the ability to say no to any single trade package. He has the ability to say no to any kind of trade. He doesn't just have to give the Suns a list of teams he'd be okay with. He can say no to any specific trade framework. So really, Bradley Beal has as much control as any GM in this deal. He has as much power as Matt Ishbia. He has as much power as Pat Riley, which is why giving a player a no-trade clause is extremely dangerous and something you don't do unless the guy's a top 5, top 10 player in the world. And even then, we rarely ever see that because of the player movement and the rules that lead up to a guy being even eligible to get a no-trade clause. Bradley Beal's no-trade clause is going to be a huge wrench, and one that, honestly, if Bradley Beal doesn't want to get traded, he won't get traded this trade deadline, and he holds the keys to any kind of deal. Now, there are reports right now saying that he would be willing to potentially waive his no-trade clause to go to Milwaukee. And you think about the Milwaukee Bucks here. First of all, they were one of the final suitors for Bradley Beal when he was still a Washington Wizard. And I also think, just considering the Milwaukee Bucks presently, they're a team that I think with Chris Middleton, how injury prone he has become over the last few years, and the way he's kind of aged out of being a star contributor for them, Bradley Beal's the type of player who could make significant sense as an upgrade over Chris Middleton. And while I think Bradley Beal has the worst contract in the NBA, he is still, at this point in time, an actual better player than Chris Middleton. Now, this would leave the Milwaukee Bucks extremely small, but you think about Damian Lillard, some of his best years came in Portland playing alongside CJ McCollum. Bradley Beal can be that kind of player. Now, the Blazers never had a good defense. They also didn't have Giannis Antetokounmpo and Brook Lopez protecting the paint either. They had Yusuf Nurkic playing center. So, and Suns fans know how ugly that got, right? So, for me, Bradley Beal, listen, I wouldn't make this trade if I was Milwaukee. I think there's other options out there. They also end up getting Alec Burks in this. Again, money would have to get moved around. Chris Livingston might have to be included into this deal, as well as maybe some other, veteran minimum player to get a deal done here. Toronto could harbor a little bit more salary. Maybe that's where the Chris Livingston contract could go. But all in all here, Milwaukee, I think, upgrades over Chris Middleton into Bradley Beal for their current roster. Now, again, the contract isn't pretty and I think does limit them going forward. But at the end of the day, this is the type of framework I think we could realistically see come to fruition at this year's trade deadline or maybe even beforehand. Framework 2, though, is really the one I'm excited about. This one, very similar. Jimmy Butler goes to Phoenix. Chris Middleton and draft picks go to Miami, but this time there's no Toronto Raptors involvement. Instead, the Chicago Bulls are the team involved. So as a result of that, the Bulls get off of Javon Carter's contract, send that to Miami. Again, thinking about the way that Gabe Vincent fit into Miami, Javon Carter is a real bulldog. He picks up full court, moves his feet extremely well. I think has one of the better pull-up three-point shots in the NBA, and I know that's going to sound crazy. If you watch this guy play in transit, he shoots a lot of pull-up threes, and I think for Miami specifically, if they're looking for a little bit more three-point volume, which I think would be beneficial to their actual offense, I could see Javon Carter carving out a role for Eric Spoelstra in a unique, 12 to 18 minutes per game kind of role. Bobby Portis, again, a guy who I think as a bench scorer could fit in Miami pretty well. Now, again, if you're looking at the contract flexibility, this package doesn't give Miami as much flexibility as that Toronto Raptors package does, which is why I think the reporting around Toronto right now is pointing to them being very likely the fourth team because they have this collection of expiring contracts, whether it be Bruce Brown or the two we included in there, and Davion Mitchell and Chris Boucher. There's options, right? And Miami could have maybe their pick of those options rather than Bobby Portis and Javon Carter in this package. But again, I think the real center point here for the Heat is Chris Middleton and 2 first-round picks. The Bulls are the ones who take in Bradley Beal. And you might be saying, okay, well, Beal going to Milwaukee made some sense because they were a suitor for him last time when he was getting traded from Washington. And they are still a team with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard that could be a theoretical threat in the playoffs. That makes sense for him to maybe waive his no-trade clause. Why would he waive his no-trade clause to go to Chicago? And my answer to this question is very, very clear. Billy Donovan, his old college coach, someone he very clearly looks up to, has spoken very highly of multiple times on the record. He credits Billy Donovan for helping him, turn from a boy to a man. I think he would be open to a reunion there if one made sense. The Bulls also get Alec Burks, and for taking on Bradley Beal's contract, they get a 2029 first-round pick. Now, you might be saying, well, why would the Bulls want Bradley Beal? They're not very good. They are a team that should be more focused on losing than winning, and I completely agree with you. And you might be saying, well, that contract's huge and it's terrible. Why would the Bulls want that in the midst of their kind of retool rebuild? Well, here's the answer. One, they're not even lined up for cap space over the next 2 summers anyway. With Zach LaVine's contract, they cannot really open up avenues to pay free agents in 2025 or 2026 off seasons. So you might as well take Javon Carter's money and Zach LaVine's money, put those two things together to equal Bradley Beal's money, walk out with an extra first-round pick. And oh yeah, by the way, you guys nailed it when you said, well, Zach LaVine's better than Bradley Beal. Correct. The Bulls need to lose more games. The Bulls need to try and position themselves for higher draft picks. In my mock drafts on the channel, the Bulls have ranged from pick 8 to pick number 13. And I think we can all agree one of the worst spots to be in the NBA is between pick 8 and pick 13. You're not even getting playoff revenue. You're not a relevant team. There's no threat of you ever winning a first-round series. You're nothing. You're in the middle ground. You're not getting premium draft assets. You're stuck. Your team is not good enough to really compete for postseason success. Your team isn't bad enough to put yourself for lottery success and put yourself in a position to win the lottery with regularity, right? Listen, it's not a guarantee. You could be the worst team in the league. You have a 14% chance. But what I'm going to tell you right now is if you're the 12th best team, you have less than a 3% chance. Would you rather have the 14% shot or the 3% shot at Cooper Flagg this year? I think we all know the answer to that. And while it's too late for the Bulls to probably enter that first overall pick category right now in terms of their tanking, having Bradley Beal going forward instead of Zach LaVine would help them lose more games. And for Milwaukee, it's very clear here. I don't trust a Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal backcourt. They're too little, too small, not switchable enough. And when you think about the defensive side, especially with them probably guarding in the corner quite a bit on non-threats, they're going to be asked to tag rollers, and they're just too little. Zach LaVine, while yes, has dealt with injuries and isn't a great defensive player himself, He is significantly bigger than Bradley Beal. He is more athletic than Bradley Beal. And Beal has had his own share of injuries. So for me, Zach LaVine seems like the way better fit in Milwaukee. He's having a tremendous season. I think one of the more underrated players in the NBA. I think he makes way more sense for the Milwaukee Bucks. And this deal just flat out works financially. In the past framework, we had to find more ways to move money around. Things were kind of a little tight. This package, this framework, flat out works. This is a deal that can be done today. And I honestly think it should be. The Bulls get a first-round pick for eating Bradley Beal. The Heat get 2 first-round picks for trading Jimmy Butler and taking in short-term contracts in Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, Javon Carter. Zach LaVine goes to Milwaukee and can instantly be the third guy next to Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think Zach LaVine's off-ball skill set and his scoring gravity from the perimeter and in transition could all be tremendous things in Milwaukee. I think for the first time ever in his career being on a real contending team, a very competitive team with serious playoff aspirations, I think we'd see a significant uptick defensively from him in both his activity and success rate on that end of the floor, especially in a slightly smaller role where he has a little bit more energy to utilize on defense going into the back half of this season. I really hope you guys did enjoy the video. Again, I want you to comment your predictions down below. Comment your thoughts. What did you think about these trade frameworks? I really prefer Framework 2. Framework 1 seems to be the one that most people are reporting on right now. There's a lot more noise about the Raptors' involvement than the Bulls' involvement at this point in time. But I, for a long time, have been talking about the Chicago Bulls being a team to monitor in any Jimmy Butler, Bradley Beal trade because of the Billy Donovan, Bradley Beal connection going back to their time with the Florida Gators. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.